Welcome back, everybody, to the Unrestricted podcast. We are in the very low point of news in terms of NBA and other sports. It is late July, early August, but that means training camp has started, and we're really excited to talk about NFL. So we're going to be giving you guys a pretty NFL-heavy episode this week. We're going to be talking about the running back situation, the progressions that have been made with Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor in the last week. We're going to be doing a bit of a deep dive into the AFC West, giving our predictions on each of the four teams and how they're going to finish, maybe some breakout players from each team. And we're also going to give a brief update on the Damian Lillard situation, talking about the statement that the NBA made. And then we are going to wrap up today's episode by talking about offensive and defensive rookie of the year candidates for the NFL. So to start off, we can just get the Dame thing out of the way. Pretty much what happened was the NBA made a statement publicly about Dame and Aaron Goodwin, his agent, saying that if Dame, his agent, or any other future players make comments about going to a specific team, there will be repercussions. There's been kind of a big buzz about this in the national media. A lot of people kind of saying, well, Anthony Davis did this a few years ago. James Harden has been doing this. Why is Dame being kind of punished for this? And it has to do with the new CBA, but in my opinion, this is a little bit of an empty threat by the NBA. Obviously, from a league standpoint, they don't want player empowerment to this level, and we can agree or disagree with that. Personally, I am very pro player on that side, but I don't think that needs to really be debated with this. I think this is a very big empty threat by the league. They have to issue some sort of statement and make public that from their standpoint, this is unacceptable. They fined Anthony Davis a few times when they did it. It was mainly just a slap on the wrist, and that's kind of how I see this statement. Trent, do you think this is a big deal at all, or what do you kind of think about that?
Yeah, I feel like I agree with you from an overall standpoint when it comes to that type of stuff. I mean, definitely player empowerment is something that I'm an advocate for as well. And I'm curious to see what direction it kind of gets taken into in the future. But yeah, I don't have a ton to say specifically about that as of right now. We'll see how it all shapes up. But that's like roughly where my frame of mind's at. So,
yep. I don't think this will impact the Dame trade that eventually happens. I still think he'll end up with the Heat. I think Joe Karn is just doing his due diligence and trying to extract the most value that he can from a third or fourth team in this situation. And I still am of the opinion that to start the season, Damian Lillard will be on the Miami Heat, but we'll continue monitoring this as more news kind of comes out. So if that's all we have for NBA content, we can move into an update on the running back situation. Obviously, last episode, we talked about the situation with running backs not getting the long-term contracts that they probably deserve, some potential solutions to how this can be solved in the future. But as of now, Saquon Barkley had a little bit of a puzzling move to both me and Trent. He signed a 1-year, $11 million deal, and he's going to be playing for the Giants under that contract this year. And then the Jonathan Taylor news came out a few days ago, pretty much saying that he was one of the most upset running backs about the situation. A very rocky relationship with Jim Irsay, the Colts GM, and a lot of kind of back and forth has happened with that. Pretty much Jim Irsay saying Jonathan Taylor is essentially replaceable, threatening to hold him out, putting him on the non-football related injury list, which would suspend him from pay and pretty much not allow him to play this season. Pretty ugly situation. Jonathan Taylor obviously publicly requests a trade. I don't think that's going to come to fruition, but maybe we'll see. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think about this, Trent? Obviously, we're pro player like we talked about last week, obviously going to be on the side of both Saquon and Jonathan Taylor, but what do you think about this whole situation?
Yeah, I think it's funny how all the Colts stuff is kind of coming out right after we did our dark horse playoff team.
Yeah.
I threw out the Colts, and I think this whole situation is definitely going to damper their hopes to have a winning season and hopefully turn the ship around. Because I think Jonathan Taylor is an integral part about just continuing to be a high-powered offense, or I guess reverting to a high-powered offense like they were 2 years ago, and being where they should be with all the talent they have on their roster. You know, from the perspective of the players, I mean, I totally understand, as we talked about in our most previous episode. As far as Saquon, I don't want to say it makes sense, but sitting in his shoes, like we talked about this earlier this week, just trying to rationalize why is it that he signed that, and I don't know, because he was talking about holding out, and by no means did he get paid what his value is, but at the same time, like in the past when we've seen these holdouts and this type of stuff, the player doesn't get what they want. Like, how often does that really happen? I guess Lamar is one of the few where like the holdout kind of paid off to some degree. But it's a different situation. It's quarterbacks, and it's a former MVP, and it's not really he has some injury history, but not any like massive ones in the way that Saquon kind of has. But I mean, maybe the thought process is I'm going to take what I can get because I know that the situation is not going to change. I think that's probably the most likely reasoning behind it. But as far as the Jonathan Taylor thing, it's hard to like adequately evaluate it because there's so much stuff is coming out so fast that it's just kind of a crazy situation, dumpster fire. Jim Irsay saying all these comments, and quite frankly, some of them not making any sense. Like I read some of them on Twitter, I guess now to be called X. I couldn't even like wrap my head around what he was trying to say on some of them. But anyways, beside the point, I think it's cool to some degree what Jonathan Taylor's doing because I think he's trying to make a point. If you listen to him talk in interviews, he's definitely a very like speaking on behalf of all the running backs, not necessarily just for him. Like he's almost like being a I don't know, diplomat or a representative of all of them, which is cool because I think it's needed and necessary. Even if it doesn't come to fruition right now, I think it's good to have someone fighting for them in the long term. And to kind of reflect on the suggestions we had as far as like changing CBA and changing the regulations, I definitely like after some reflection think that changing the amount of years that a player can be signed to and then flipping the team option to a player option, I really think that's a great idea. And after even reading more articles on it and learning about it, it just reinforced how great of an idea I feel like that was, that Kyle and I kind of pieced together from some other ideas we read about. And hopefully that starts to change a little bit. But it doesn't seem like it's getting any better outside of the dialogue on social media. That's like a little bit promising. I feel like people are talking about it and it's becoming more of a buzz and people are getting defended. But that's pretty much all I have regarding that. I mean, there hasn't been any massive updates outside of that Saquon signing and, of course, the Jonathan Taylor signing. But all the dudes who were still out there waiting to find a team are still out there. Even though Dalvin Cook's likely to sign with the Jets, I'm curious to see what that payment is going to be, how much that contract's going to be. I'm anticipating probably like $6 million, maybe a little less.
I think maybe less.
Maybe even less, which is pretty crazy to think about. I mean, he's pretty productive last year still.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got injury issues too, but still. I mean, it's super interesting. Surprised like the market isn't – I feel like what the market should be is more so just running backs only get signed to short-term deals. And if they could come off their rookie deal and it could start out as a short-term deal, then they would get paid their worth in just short-term deals. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see.
If you were to make a prediction on Jonathan Taylor this year, do you think – these comments, this relationship is unmendable? Do you think he's going to be in a Colts uniform to start the year, or what do you think about that?
The things that are coming out of both sides are pretty radical. Like I can't think back to like even like the Le'Veon Bell situation wasn't this like explosive of a situation. I would say definitely prediction. I wouldn't say he starts game one. Definitely not. This sounds like a bad. Like he's gonna. I'd see him holding out, and if they do that. Injured reserve, weird clause that they have kind of threatening and impending over his head right now that they're publicly addressing. Oh, yeah, he's not going to play. He's going to prove a point. And yeah.
I don't know. I personally think he will play for the Colts this year. I think he'll start game one. I just like if that was to ever happen, they would just receive so much. Like their fans would boo them every single game. They would. Their own players, that would just cause such friction in the locker room, and maybe they don't care about that. Maybe it's a game of chicken between Irsay and Jote, but I don't know. I think when push comes to shove, when we get closer to the season, the two sides will reach an agreement. They're not going to be happy with each other, but I think Jote will want to go out there and play for his team, and I think the Colts will, I don't know, maybe have some situation that soothes a little bit of tensions, at least to the point where Jonathan Taylor is willing to play this last year of his contract. So, yeah.
Well, just think about this. Like, the way I just said and when we both just said how the backs want to prove a point, and hold out. At the same time, I think the owners want to prove a point because that's the source of all of these issues. And this whole running back dilemma is the way things are structured and I don't necessarily think it's by design. I think it's just utilizing the system that's already in place and I guess maximizing it and to some degree of using it, even though it's not illegal. It's just borderline unethical. And so I could see maybe Jim Irsay following through with what he said, especially considering the dude is just, so obviously he's a billionaire, he's a pro sports team owner, but he's like a huge rock music fan and just like has all this crazy memorabilia. And he's a very like loose cannon type guy. Like, pretty sure he takes a helicopter everywhere he goes. And just like a billionaire like that, like he doesn't really have anything to lose. I would not be surprised if he followed through with the threat of doing the injured
He's going to become
crazy.
He's going to become the most hated owner in the league if he does.
I could see him not giving a shit though.
Yeah.
But I liked him before this too, and I'm not saying I don't like him now. I'm not by no means. I mean, he hasn't done anything yet. He just said these like comments. He's an old guy too, so like I don't hold too much against him. But we'll see. But I think it could get worse. As bad as it already is, I definitely think it could get worse.
Do you think he's more likely to be traded or be like sit out and still be on the Colts?
Definitely sit out. I think when he requested the trade, they said we're not trading you, right?
Yeah.
So like that part, I think is the statement, is the stand by the owners, is like him just saying, "Fuck that." So I don't know. It just seems like a horrible situation. I think it actually like it's revealing. I think this past season, considering how much talent they had, and we talked about this last week, this team was like very much so arguably one of the top 5 talents in the league last year. And they had how many wins again? 4?
4, I think, yeah.
Jesus. Like that doesn't just happen. Like there has to be some issues. And maybe this is like some of the problems and skeletons in the closet getting released. And that's why all this is not why it's all coming out right now, but it's a reflection of maybe what's happening in that locker room, and not just locker room, but organization. Yeah. But who knows? This is all just speculation.
Yeah, and this will be the last thing I say about this. Obviously, like the motives here are political in nature. They really have nothing to do with actual roster construction. If they did, if the Colts really didn't want to move forward with Jote, they would just trade him and recoup value, or they would just pay him and play him, which is what I actually think the Colts should do from a pure football standpoint. I think having a quarterback like Anthony Richardson, giving him a great run game to lean on, like a Jonathan Taylor, along with this Colts O-line, would be massively beneficial for his first couple years in the league. I think the Colts are in rebuilding mode, and I don't think giving Jonathan Taylor a 3-year deal is going to really cripple them in terms of their future plans. So looking at it from a pure football standpoint, I think the Colts are best to move forward kind of building around Jonathan Taylor, at least in the short term. But obviously, this honestly has gotten to the point where it has nothing to do with football. So that's kind of where we're at with that. Any closing thoughts on the Jote thing?
The 3-year deal for what? What would you pay him? So that's where it gets hard. Is then you put yourself in the owner's shoes. Because he's asking for like 16 a year. I'm pretty sure is like what?
What do you
I don't know if that's 14? Confirmed.
3 years, 14 a year. I don't know. Because Nick Chubb got that right.
I can't
3 years for 12. I think Chubb's contract is somewhere around there, and that was the last big like long-term running back contract. So I think Jote earned a little bit more than Chubb. I think from traditional like market rules that would make sense, but obviously the running back market is in a state of just doom, I guess.
So Chubb's contract is actually 3 for 36, so it's 12 a year. I would say, I mean that deal was made prior to the market being where it's currently at, but I'd say about that is what I would offer. And if he's refusing that, because if that's an offer that's not really on the table for most backs right now.
No.
And considering his injury history, I think even like 3 for 10, if I was his agent, I'd tell him, dude, you got to sign that. Like, there's not many deals out there like that. Because I bet what they're offering, I don't know. I have no idea what they're offering. I'm like we always say. I mean, I don't know. I've never been in an NFL negotiation room like that yet. But probably 3 for whatever the duration was is definitely sub double digits. It was probably like 7 or 8.
Yeah, yeah, I'd assume so as well.
Yeah, and then he's just like saying I'm refusing that because I'm not worth that. I don't know. Yeah, it's a weird situation, but yeah, Kyle, you can close that out and bring us into the next topic if you want.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of our thoughts on the Jonathan Taylor recent news. I'm sure there will be something more that comes out within the next 7 days about kind of the running back market. So we'll be sure to cover that weekly as more news comes out, along with obviously the Damian Lillard saga. That can be a reoccurring quick topic to open our shows. But to get into the kind of meat and potatoes of today's episode, we're going to be talking about the AFC West. We're going to be going team by team. And then at the end, we'll give our kind of projected rankings for the division, where we see each team finishing, maybe playoff success, maybe playoff berth or lack thereof. But the first team we're going to start with is going to be the Chiefs. I think this is the most straightforward team, and obviously that's for good reason, coming off a Super Bowl. This is the new New England Patriots. They're the next NFL dynasty. It's an Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes team. We know what that is at this point. They've done some pretty interesting things around those two, but we know what a team centered around that head coach and that quarterback is going to be, and it's going to be a absolute powerhouse in the AFC. They're going to be competitive in virtually every game they play. Obviously have made improvements to the receiver core after getting rid of Tyreek Hill. They're still in the process of rebuilding that, but they've done some pretty interesting things there in the last 2 years. Still have Travis Kelce as the number one weapon. Isaiah Pacheco breakout towards the back half of last season and the playoffs. Obviously still a great O-line, specifically on the interior. And then a handful of playmakers on defense. You know what this team is. They're fast. They score in bunches. I really don't have too much to say about the Chiefs. Trent, what do you think about the Chiefs?
Yeah, thought just popped in my head that we didn't talk about off air prior to recording, but this team, in a way that most people wouldn't even realize, that I haven't even realized, there's a ticking clock for them to find a star playmaker on offense beyond Kelce. Because when Kelce, I mean, he's old, he's to some degree old, and he's still playing at such a high level that eventually, and the volume he gets, eventually it's going to fizzle off, right? And I mean, tight ends historically can have like pretty long careers, and I don't know what that time frame is, but it's definitely before Mahomes' time frame finishes and his prime finishes, which he hasn't even. I think he's still 2-3 years from his prime, which is the most terrifying thing I think I may have said on our show so far on Unrestricted. But they need to find someone who's going to fill that void when he does decline or retire, right? Because then there's going to be at least a 3 to 4 year window of Mahomes still being really good, considering he's still on the Chiefs, which I probably anticipate he will be. And what's the timeline with Andy Reid? Is he, because he's also an older coach. When Kelce starts to fizzle off, does that mean Andy Reid gets replaced and then there's a new coaching staff with Mahomes? I mean, Mahomes is, if any talent can weather all of those things changing, it's him. But I definitely think having a new young weapon like a Rashee Rice, who they drafted in the second round out of SMU, a new receiver, like if a guy like that could come in and be offensive rookie of the year candidate, 1,000-yard type guy, perennial Pro Bowler, I'm not saying that's what he's going to be, even though I do like him as a prospect, or a Pacheco, like maybe he becomes a multiple 1,000-yard guy and takes a leap, even though that window is shorter, as we've been talking about with the running backs. But if he could have 3 or 4 more years of dominance beyond this upcoming season, then that kind of hedges Kelce's decline a little bit and keeps them at the top. But I think something has to happen. Or is it the defense? The defense becomes a top 5 defense, which he hasn't had with the Chiefs, right? Historically, maybe statistically he has, but visually, I mean, it hasn't really had.
Yeah.
Outside of in big games, because they do perform, his defense has been good, very clutch, and done what they needed to do, obviously, to win two Super Bowls thus far. But is it going to be the top 5 defense with kind of like the Brady mold with the Patriots? One of these things is going to have to happen, because it can't. This model that they have right now, I think, is probably 2 years away from becoming a little bit stale. Maybe not a little bit stale, but like stale, I would say. Is just that Mahomes, Andy Reid, Kelce core. I don't know. I just out of age, just based off of age. It could be 4 years. It totally could be 4 years. Like these are all superhuman minds and talents. But I mean, that to me is the most interesting topic about the Chiefs, because at the end of the day, they're still in that window over these next 2 years. They're still going to be dominant, still going to be Super Bowl contenders. There's nothing changing that as long as Mahomes is there and Kelsey's healthy in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But if they could find that replacement, even like a Kelsey injury could potentially be weathered, and they could make it to an AFC Championship or make a 2-3 game run and figure weird stuff out with weird, I don't know, Swiss Army knife type players like a Kadarius Toney and Rashee Rice, as I mentioned earlier, Pacheco,
MVS.
Yeah, all those dudes. Just throw in all those. Even they're like pretty deep tight end room.
Mm-hmm.
All those guys that get kind of some splash-in touchdowns at random moments, and even like weird receivers that kind of they just like find the best out of certain players. We made a comparison to the Heat when we were off air prior to this too. They almost use, because they're usually not undrafted guys, but it's just guys that they get the most out of and make them really, really good assets. But there's no surprise with this team. I mean, anything else more you got to say about the Chiefs, Kyle?
Yeah,
pretty much?
I mean, we both took a look at their schedule, and it's pretty rough, to be honest. They have a very much a Super Bowl winning team schedule. But if you look at these games, you're just going 1 through 17, and you're like, they're going to just find a way to win like 13 of these. Like, it doesn't even matter who they're playing. They're going to be in all these games. They could play the best team from each division twice, and they're going to find a way to win 13 games. It really doesn't matter.
100%.
So, I mean, that's kind of where they're at. This is just, they're the top dogs of the division and the NFL until proven otherwise. If you don't have that take, if you're predicting a regression because of whatever reason, sure, I can maybe see it, but I'm not going to be the guy to predict that. So that's kind of where I'm at with the Chiefs. Last thing on the receiver core that you talked about, since trading Tyreek Hill last year, they've been in this kind of state of maybe trying to find a big play, a big time playmaker, like you said. And they've done a pretty decent job of not giving up assets and still doing their best with that. They obviously acquired Kadarius Toney, a first-round talent. They took Sky Moore last year. They took Rashee Rice this year. Those three guys, I mean, maybe none of them breaks out, and it's just a similar thing to last year where Juju is your receiver one, and he's on the obviously lower end of receiver ones around the league, and that still works because you have Travis Kelce, and he's better than every team's best receiver. But maybe one of those guys does pop, and in the event that a Sky Moore pops, for example, there you go. This team's back to absolutely being the favorites in the NFL if they're not already. So I think the Chiefs are going to continue to kind of do this model as long as the Kelce, Mahomes, Reed trio is still going. I think they're not going to make any radical moves with the receiver core. I think they're just going to slowly take a receiver in the first, the second, trade for a receiver who maybe has his value kind of dropped, like a Kadarius Toney, and just try to find a guy that way. Because I think the chances of hitting on a guy like that in this system are higher than most other systems, obviously. So I think that's going to be the strategy going forward, and I think it's probably going to be pretty successful, to be honest.
Yeah, totally agree with you on all that. Just close out too with their schedule. I just want to highlight some of the interesting games that they have this year. I mean, there's going to be some really great ones that 2 years ago, if you looked at their schedule this year, you would not think would be great. But I mean, it just opened with the first two. You understand what I'm saying, or first 3 out of 4. So start out against Detroit at home. Like, that's just going to be great. It's going to be opening night game. And then Jacksonville the next week at Jacksonville. Two upcoming teams in a row that have a lot to prove. They want to knock off the defending champs and prove that they're for real. And then you go to Chicago. That's even an interesting one, kind of with Fields and seeing what kind of leap he can make, being able to test that right away against defending champs. And then the Jets in New York, which is going to be awesome. And then even Minnesota isn't terrible. Denver's a decent storyline against Herbert. And obviously you got that 2 times a year. And you got Miami, Philadelphia, Buffalo, Cincinnati. Dude, I mean, 70% of this season, just go turn on the Chiefs game and it's an elite matchup.
Yeah.
And they're very, very, very likely those elite matchups could be turned to bad matchups pretty quickly. So, me predicting all this as being a good matchup could be just kind of fool's gold, and I wouldn't be surprised at that at all. But yeah, so that's all we got for the Chiefs. Now transitioning into the Broncos. Of course, brought in Russell Wilson last year. and there's lots of buzz on their offensive core taking a massive leap with him. Hired Nathaniel Hackett, was very unsuccessful tenure with that team, and then finished very, very subpar record, underperformed in a decent division with the Super Bowl champs, of course. And yeah, I mean, Patrick Surtain, he took a leap and he's proven he's one of the top 5 corners in the league, if not top 3. And he's got a lot of promise in their defense as a whole. They got Frank Clark from Kansas City, which is definitely a huge addition off the edge, former Seahawk. And hopefully that can give them some spark and they can revert to the dominant defense that they've been in the past, which they were solid last year. But I think just the offense having a lack of consistency and not being able to stay on the field, just hurt the overall consistency of the team. But now with Sean Payton, we'll see whether he can bring them back to where that New Orleans Saints team was that he held at the top for a little while and won a Super Bowl with. And yeah, so what are your thoughts on all of that stuff transitioning into the Broncos, Kyle?
Yeah, so obviously I'm a Sean Payton fan. I definitely think that that's going to bring some much needed culture change and just stability to this team, because obviously last year they come in with sky high expectations. They kind of mirror the Los Angeles Rams model of build the roster, then trade for the star QB, bring him in, and that was obviously extremely successful for the Rams. So people were predicting a similar thing. A lot of Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp comparisons happened before the start of last season. And obviously, the result just couldn't have been further from the Rams' result. They completely were a dumpster fire, and that was for a multitude of reasons. They were one of the worst, if not the worst, offenses in the NFL. And they fire Nathaniel Hackett, bring in Sean Payton to kind of instill a culture change and hopefully get this team back on track. So do I think that's going to happen? I mean, maybe, but not exactly. I think I project this team to be around 500, and that's because this roster just isn't as good as we thought it was prior to the start of last year. If you look at this offense, sure, if you're still a believer in Russell Wilson, you can sell yourself on that. I think he's probably still got a few solid years left in the tank. But if you look at the run game, it's a very injured Javonte Williams coming back from a major knee injury, and that's not talked about enough. It's not just a simple, he had a high ankle sprain at the end of last season. He's coming off a major knee injury, and we'll see if he can be the explosive running back that he was at one point, because if he can't and the run game is really lacking, then their backup is Samaje Perine, and they're not going to have anything on the ground. The receivers, like I said, often drew those Kupp, Woods comparisons. I think the Jerry Jeudy thing is not going to entirely happen at this point. I think he's a great receiver, a great route runner, obviously. I don't know that he's ever going to be able to break out like some people potentially thought he was, and I don't know if this is the team for him to do that on, especially with a crowded receiver room. One guy they drafted, it was Sean Payton's first draft pick, actually, Marvin Mims. Huge fan of him. I think he could actually, there's a world where he leads this room in receiving yards and all receiving metrics, honestly. I'm a big fan of him, and I think that this could be a situation where the guys who we thought were going to do it with Sutton and Jeudy just aren't as good as we thought, and Marvin Mims comes in and actually kind of dominates this year. So he's a player I really like a lot. I think Sean Payton drafting a receiver with his first pick kind of speaks volumes, because that's not necessarily a position of need, but he wanted to go get that guy. And because of that, he probably plans on using him in creative ways and featuring him at least a little bit. And I think that that's probably going to be pretty interesting. If he can be really good, then that would benefit this team a lot, because the current offense of Russ and then these weapons, I just don't think is going to put up enough points to supplement this pretty solid defense. So that's kind of my brief thoughts on the Broncos. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, I think another thing to add on to that is them hiring Joe Lombardi from the Chargers as their OC. He was good OC to some degree in the fact that he helped them win games, but at the end of the day, he had Herbert. And I'm not saying that was the only focal point to their success, but they were very robotic a lot of the time down the field, and especially when they got into the red zone. They had success and they had good numbers, but I just think there's a lot more interesting stuff that they could have done with that team as far as motion and changing up formations and misdirection and stuff like that. I mean, and then just the ability to give Herbert the ability to play make in the red zone and then down the field. Of course, they used Keenan Allen decently well, and Mike Williams had some leaps, but I don't know. I just with this Broncos team coming off such a bad offensive performance for the entirety of the season, 2022 season, I just don't understand hiring not a particularly creative offensive coordinator. And I could be wrong about his creativity, 100%. Like, we could get there, different situation, different players, different pressure, and he empties the bag and tries this more creative stuff. And everyone has down seasons and whatever it is. So that concerns me a little bit, and that's partially why I don't really want to jump onto the train for this team. Because I do think that there's a world where they get the right play caller, and this team could be 11 wins, right? And is definitely a contender. And that's contingent upon Russ returning to what he was 2 years ago. But at the end of the day, that's my biggest concern. And week one, I think I'm excited to watch this team because I feel like I'll know fairly quickly whether what I just said is accurate or not, because I could be totally wrong. But just like seeing their play calling and what they do creativity wise. I mean, I say it again and again and again. That's really important to me. And you can win without that, and you can have different formulas to succeed. But that to me is the modern NFL. And that to me is why I love the NFL right now, and I enjoy watching it. And so even if that's not what translates to wins, that's what translates to my enjoyment of watching the game. So that's all I have on the Broncos, though. So
yeah. Final thoughts for me. I mean, I think Sean Payton is going to instill an identity in this team, and that's a very good thing. That's something that pretty much every team needs. He's going to instill stability. He's going to kind of reinvent the culture, and that's a good thing. However, I don't think the end result is going to be exactly where some people kind of projected this team at the beginning of last year. I think the roster just isn't good enough to win some big games, and I don't think specifically the offense is good enough to win some shootouts against some of the really talented AFC teams and offenses. So that's kind of my final thoughts on the Broncos. We can then transition to the Chargers. You want to start with the Chargers?
Yeah, I like the makeup of the Chargers. I definitely think they're the second best team in the division pretty clearly, and most of that is to do with Justin Herbert. I thought definitely there needed to be a coaching change to some degree, and they decided to go the route of coordinators and hired Kellen Moore from the Dallas Cowboys, which I think could work. I think he does a lot of cool stuff five wide, as we were just talking about earlier. Creativity wise, I think he has a lot of interesting stuff that he does, contrast to what we were just talking about with the Broncos. And he's a young guy, a lot to prove. And I think that could be the difference. I think that's the biggest need that the Chargers have outside of health, is they need that creative play caller. And I think he could very well be that guy. And if that's the case, I think they're a very dangerous team. I know they're a very dangerous team. I don't just think it. And I think Herbert has been waiting to have that leap too from his rookie. He had a really good rookie season, record-breaking rookie season, and then now he's to some degree plateaued. And I don't think that's entirely his fault. I think it has to do with some of the stuff we just talked about. But I hope that's this year, because I think Mahomes having that direct rival with a really competitive team in division will just make football world better. And I think it'll pressure the Chiefs to try new things and try to get that new star that will fill Kelsey's role in that next era of Mahomes after this first 5 to 6 year stint. And I think just everything becomes more interesting, because I was really excited about this division last year and I was insanely disappointed by it. And I want to have that this season. So those are my hopes, and those are to some degree a little bit of my predictions, but I'm not gonna get too far ahead of myself and all that stuff. I like Quentin Johnson. I think it's kind of a cool little twin towers with him and Mike Williams, like really good catch at the point, contested catch receivers, big bodies. With Keenan Allen, hopefully he can get healthy and prevent some of those hamstring injuries that he's been having over the past few years. And of course, that comes with age. But Keenan Allen, one of my favorite players in the NFL. definitely top 3 favorite receivers in the NFL. I love watching him play. I love his route running. I always have him on my fantasy team, always rooting for him. And so I really just want to see this offense take a leap. And then their defense stay healthy and prove to be what they can and have Bosa as much as they possibly can. And hopefully maybe Khalil Mack can have a little comeback season too. Because he's still, I feel like he still has some really good years in him. He has the potential to have a comeback player of the year type season where he has 14 plus sacks. I could totally see that happening. And if that happens, I think that could also put this team over the hump, even if the play calling is very similar to what it was last year. But then if it was even a marginal jump offensively, and then you have that happen and some defensive guys take leaps, this team breaks into the top 10 range rather than that mid to late tier range that they've kind of been in. Oh, yeah. I'm excited.
Yeah, there's a lot of buzz right now about potential Justin Herbert MVP season, and that's probably for a few reasons. One is Kellen Moore, like you talked about. He's going to kind of use Herbert like he should be used. The last year I watched a lot of Chargers, specifically Herbert, and the way they were using him was just so strange. Justin Herbert has a huge arm. He's a very aggressive quarterback in nature, and they just used him to dump down to Austin Eckler every single play and give him 13 receptions a game. And from a fantasy standpoint, obviously had Austin Eckler. I love that, and I loved watching. I love watching Austin Eckler play. A lot of people don't like his play style as much. He's one of my favorite running backs. I love Austin Eckler a lot, but that's obviously not how you use a dynamic young quarterback with a huge arm. And that was just so weird to watch Justin Herbert so restricted last year. And obviously the hope is that Kellen Moore is going to, like you said, run a lot of 5 wide, take a lot of shots down the field. You obviously brought in Quinn Johnston. You have finally healthy receiver core for him. I think that Justin Herbert's numbers are going to be insane this year. I think he's finally going to be unlocked. I think that's the first step in making this team a true contender. Obviously, Keenan Allen getting up there in age, but still great. Still dominates around the sideline area for 10, 15 yards. Good safety blanket for Herbert. Obviously, Mike Williams, extremely athletic, deep ball threat, jump ball threat. He's been that. He's going to have his volatile weeks where he just goes absolutely nuclear. And then you bring in Quinn Johnston, obviously has a big frame as well, but is a yards after catch guy, which is exactly what they need. Because obviously Keenan Allen wasn't that, and Mike Williams was more big play, vertical jump ball threat. You bring in a guy like Quinn Johnson who you can throw a slant to, and he can go get you 25 more yards. I think that just adds a whole new element to this passing game, and this passing game could be one of the best in the NFL, in my opinion. The defense, like you talked about, obviously this defense was projected to be really good last season, and they pretty much weren't. Still have a lot of playmakers, even if they are kind of on the older end. Guys like Khalil Mack, like you talked about. I think if this offense is as good as I think it's going to be, I think this defense should be able to kind of supplement that and play well enough, get timely turnovers, hopefully. And if they can do that, I think this team definitely could be a contender in the AFC, to be honest. I agree with what you said about having a true kind of dynamic rivalry for Mahomes in division. I think that's good for the sport, and I would love to see the Herbert versus Mahomes play out over the next 8 years or whatever, because I think that'd be awesome.
Most definitely excited for all that. Moving into the Raiders though. So last team we have in the division, I'm gonna get into kind of some negative comments here just to brace all the listeners. I said this right as it happened the second I saw the update, but I think the signing of Jimmy Garoppolo is one of the most illogical things I have seen in a long time. That's coming from someone who just hates the Band-Aid quarterback strategy where we're just going to sign a dude who's decent and competent, even though we have so many issues on our team and we're not going to be good anyways. And so why are we getting a quarterback like this? We're like, let's say it was the Eagles and they didn't have Jalen Hurts. Then assigning a Jimmy Garoppolo to fill it in because you could still potentially win a Super Bowl with that team. That makes sense. This Raiders team is culture isn't there yet. Devontae Adams doesn't really seem like he's happy. Renfro is having injury issues, and he wasn't even detailed into their scheme really, or put into their scheme and given any individual routes from most of the games that I watched. He wasn't really featured in their offense, and it really disappointed me because I thought that was a massive window for them especially considering McDaniels too. I mean, used so many slots in the past with the Patriots. I just don't think he didn't use him at all.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just coming from me being somewhat of a casual Raiders watcher. Like I didn't watch individual Raiders games every week, but I watched a lot. I mean, I watched almost every single game every season since I was 9 or 10, and I just a lot of bad things to say about that team last year. And I thought that they were going to be contending to win the division last year. I was a believer in them. I know there's a lot of people who, like Rich Eisen, like loved them, and he went out on a limb a bunch of times saying he thinks that they're going to win the division, and it didn't happen. But I just don't understand the Jimmy G thing. I just don't get it. Why are you getting a Band-Aid quarterback when you're not going to be good anyways? It just doesn't make any sense to me. Why would you pay him? Why wouldn't you just try to get Caleb Williams or something like that instead of being in this middle ground? You're not going to win. You're not going to win with him. It's just not going to happen. And he's got all his injury issues. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I hate it. There's nothing against Jimmy G. I like Jimmy G. I grew up a Patriots fan, and I liked him, and I've rooted for him. And I think he's a good dude. But I just don't. It doesn't make any sense. 0 sense.
It's just like, when has the Band-Aid quarterback thing ever worked? You know, like we looked at the Colts the last however many years, bringing in Phillip Rivers, Matt Ryan, and they were doing the exact same thing, and they just stalled their rebuild. Is just what they did. They didn't allow themselves to get a top QB prospect. Got lucky that there was 3 in this year's class, but it just doesn't make any sense. The Band-Aid quarterback is something that I hope my team never employs, because it's just not a good idea. And I was talking to Brett Byer, fellow Raiders fan, about this team. I was pretty low on them coming in. I was pretty much getting ready to call them like a 4-win team. And I think that could still happen, but he did kind of sell me on some talent across the board with this team. I mean, obviously Devontae Adams, he's not happy. Josh Jacobs is not happy. That's kind of, it could spell dumpster fire, but I think they do have enough talent to not completely bottom out and be like a top 3 pick this year, which maybe is worse for them in the long term. But I think that having those weapons, you bring in Jacoby Myers as well, who I think is a really solid receiver. Draft Michael Mayer. I maybe not year 1, but long term, I like his upside at tight end. And then obviously the pass rush on the other end. Max Crosby, one of the best pass rushers in the league. You draft Tyree Wilson at 7, I think they drafted. Has potential to really get after the quarterback. Obviously, the flip side of that is the secondary is absolute. They're cooked. They're going to give up so many yards to receivers, to any opposing star receiver, and they're going to play a lot of them. Obviously, most NFL teams have them. They play great passing attacks in division, so that's going to really be difficult for them. Honestly, I think this roster has enough talent to not completely bottom out, like I said, but we've been looking at the schedules, and the NFL is good right now, man. Like, even teams that we don't think are that good hypothetically could be good. Teams like the Patriots, who I'm not big on. Maybe they're a decent team. They definitely could beat this Raiders team. Teams like the Green Bay Packers. I mean, we don't know what Jordan Love is, but maybe Jordan Love is solid and they're a 9-win team. I mean, that's possible. And I really don't see that possibility with the Raiders. And it's because of quarterback play and culture. Quarterback is obviously, they have one of the worst starters in the league, and it's the Band-Aid quarterback, really no direction there. And they really have no identity or culture post Gruden, which has really kind of put them in a difficult situation. I'm not saying this was an easy situation to navigate post Gruden, but they're really in need of pretty much a complete overhaul, in my opinion. However, I don't think they're really in a spot where they can just tank, get Caleb Williams, and then just restart. Hopefully that's the route they go. But if I was to predict, I think they're going to beat bad teams, maybe surprise a few teams, catch some teams on injury, and win around 6 or 7 games.
100%. That's what's going to happen. I mean, there could be a world where they win 8, maybe, but I think 6 or 7 is really, really the sweet spot of what this team's probably going to do. But to get on to a positive note, I mean, maybe one of my favorite, if not favorite, defensive players in the whole NFL right now is Max Crosby. Is an absolute monster, and I can't wait to see him continue to get better and hopefully make a defensive player of the year push, which he definitely should have been in last year. It's just they weren't that good. And I think, I mean, him alone, and that's why I think 6 or 7 is like definitely a sweet spot. Like him alone, even if everything else goes terribly, Like they're going to win 6 games. I think that's kind of their floor. I don't really see them winning less than 6. But I also don't really see them winning more than 8,
Yeah.
maybe 9.
Yeah, I
But
agree with that.
I don't
100%.
think this team could be a double-digit win. I mean, maybe a weird scenario where Jimmy G is all of a sudden really good somehow and stays healthy. I don't know. Probably not. But I think 6 to 9 wins, more likely 6 to 8 wins because of that. But Max Crosby's all-world talent. He's fun to watch. I love his swagger. I like just his everything about him. He's fun to watch. And then with Tyree Wilson, their new rookie, we were just talking about that too, off air, out of Texas Tech. I believe the 7th pick might have been the 8th pick. You guys can verify that. But he's raw talent, freak athlete. Him paired with Crosby, if he can figure some stuff out, a few things click, 8 sacks, whatever it is, like that'll do it. 7, 8 sacks, like that. That'll create a huge flare for their defense, even if their secondary isn't very good. And then maybe like a rookie somewhere there that pops off and takes a lead. Like that could go a long ways. But I think that would be what it takes to get them to 9 wins. Is some player that we don't even know about right now taking some leap, or a rookie that's really good that nobody realized was that good.
Yeah.
But outside of that, I mean, we just kind of gave a little preview into our record predictions, as we were saying that they'll probably be between 6 and 8 wins. I have my very specific. I went down the line of each of their schedules, marked off the games I think they're going to win and games I think they're going to lose. So we can start at the bottom up. So I believe my prediction is that the Raiders will be 6-11, 4th place in the division. Very well, though, could be 7-10. In a way, I almost want to switch it to 7-10. So, maybe I'll just roll into that as 7-10 for the Raiders, and switch it to 7-10. And then for the Broncos, I had them slated to 8-9, but I think the deciphering game to switch them to 7-10 is their matchup with the Raiders. So I'm going to say both the Broncos and Raiders slate in at 7-10. And then I think the Chargers are going to go 11-8, and then the Chiefs winning the division at 13-4. With a little bit of variability there. And if the play calling thing with the Chargers is really good, the Chiefs' schedule was so difficult that, they could both finish 12-5 or something along those lines. And then there's a division tiebreaker between whatever their matchup series score was. I could totally see that, and that would make for the best storyline.
Yeah.
And the most interesting storyline. So hopefully that's what ends up happening, and we don't get the same old. But Kyle, do you have any differences in your predictions, or is yours somewhat similar?
It's pretty similar. We talked about this together. Obviously, if I was to bet on records or something, I think I would go with both the Chiefs and the Chargers at 12 wins. I think that makes sense. Obviously, like you talked about, the Chiefs just have so many difficult games, and this hasn't mattered in the past. Like I said, they just find a way to win every single one of their hard games. But sure, let's just say maybe they drop an extra one. I think the Chargers are going to be great this year. I definitely could see the Chiefs winning the division, just beating them out with a tiebreaker, and the Chargers getting a wild card spot with 12 wins as well. In terms of the Broncos and the Raiders, you put them both at 7 wins. I agree with you. I think that's a good sweet spot for both of them. I think maybe Broncos one more, Raiders one less like you initially had. But, somewhere around there. We don't really have too radical of takes on either of these teams. So, yeah, I think your rankings make a lot of sense. That's pretty much what I agree with. And, yeah, coming out of the AFC West, we got Chiefs winning, maybe by a closer margin than a lot of people think. We think the Chargers are a playoff team, and we think the Broncos and the Raiders miss the playoffs but don't completely bottom out. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I feel like it's a middle of the pack division at the end of the day.
Yeah.
With that's somewhat top heavy. But at the same time, Broncos and Raiders have a lot of good pieces, really, really high level star pieces that maybe could change a little bit of that fortune and prove us all wrong. So we will see what ends up happening there. I'm excited to see what happens in this division. Definitely a little less than a lot of the other divisions that we could potentially talk about, just because it is so top heavy with the Chiefs. But we will see what happens. So, all right. So, Kyle, you want to transition us into the next topic?
Yeah, so to close out today's episode, we're going to be giving our predictions for NFL offensive and defensive rookie of the year. We're going to give our just predictions, like if we were to bet on it. And then we're going to talk about a few dark horses that we think have probably more of a shot than people are giving credit for. So Do you want to start with offensive, Trent?
Yeah, I'm actually going to switch my initial realistic choice to my actual dark horse choice as my realistic one. So I'm going to go with Zay Flowers to win Rookie of the Year offensively. I really, really like what he does and how angular his routes are and how sharp his cuts are and everything coming out of their camp right now. Like, and the Ravens have just been starving for a star receiver, like that really clear cut star that Lamar can have and lean on. And I think that could potentially help this team make that deeper playoff run that they've been trying to do and take a leap, which I would love because Lamar Jackson is my favorite, one of the, if not my favorite players in the NFL. And I'd love that. And I think Zay Flowers is it. I think he's legit. I think what everyone's saying is valid. And if you look at the praise and the level of players giving him that praise, super exciting. And so, yeah, that's my initial choice for offensive rookie of the year. I switched it. I initially had Jahmyr Gibbs, but I know Kyle's going to talk about him a little bit, so I just switched Zay Flowers to my realistic one. So, Kyle, you want to talk about yours? I don't know if I previewed it a little bit, but
my realistic one would be Bryce Young, but my dark horse one would be Jahmyr Gibbs. So I'll talk about Bryce Young for a little bit. This is obviously a quarterback's award to lose, I would say. I think it would default to a quarterback, all else being equal. That's not to say that it's a lock that a quarterback wins it. Obviously, we've seen at least a few times the last couple of years that's not the case. But I think that between the three top four selections that were quarterbacks, I think Bryce Young has the best chance to win the most games and kind of just play the best. It was between him and Stroud. I don't think that Richardson in his first year is going to succeed as much as both of them have the most early success, especially with this Jonathan Taylor news. That could potentially be a dumpster fire now. Long term, I definitely believe in Richardson's talent. I think he could be the best quarterback in this class, but rookie of the year, it was between Stroud and Young for me, and pretty similar rosters. They both have a long way to go. They're both rebuilding. They both drafted their franchise QB with this year's first round selections. And I just think Bryce Young is a bit more polished and has more of a chance to win games. I mean, there's a world where the Panthers are actually a playoff team and they win the division, and Bryce Young plays a little bit above expectations. The defense is really good, like it kind of has been the last couple of years. Maybe a breakout from a player on their offense, a rookie maybe, or maybe just a player that we hadn't previously considered. I think that's very possible, and that's kind of why I leaned Young over Stroud. I think Stroud has potential to lead his team to a few more wins than people are expecting. I think the Texans could be better than expected, but like I said, I think there's a real chance that Young actually makes the playoffs, and that's just because he plays in the worst division of football, obviously. But I just think he doesn't have anything that makes me think his play is going to lead them to lose games. That happens a lot for rookies, and Young doesn't really strike me as a prospect like that. I think that he might not have the most eye-popping numbers, but I think we could see a few game-winning drives here. I think, like I said, the record could be better than a lot of people think, and I think the narrative could be on his side for this award. So he would be my realistic pick. In terms of my kind of dark horse pick, it's going to be Jahmyr Gibbs. Love the talent of Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, he was projected to go kind of late first, early second, and then the Lions kind of make the decision to take him early at pick 12, I believe, and all of the interviews of Lions execs talking about him, they absolutely love this guy. They had a top 10 grade on him. They obviously plan on using him in very creative ways. I think he's going to be used as like a Deebo Samuel almost, getting a bunch of different looks, getting a lot of work in the receiving game as well. I think he's going to actually be the star of this offense in a pretty, maybe not a loaded offense, but an offense with a lot of talent. Obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown brought in David Montgomery as well, who I think is going to have a good year. But I think Jahmyr Gibbs is going to score a ton of touchdowns in a variety of ways. I think he's going to have big plays. I think he's going to be used, like I said, all over the field. And just how electric he's going to be as a player is going to excite a lot of people. And that makes me think he could even beat out his running back contemporary, Bijan Robinson, and he could maybe even steal this award when a lot of people kind of aren't thinking that he can. So, yeah, what do you think about Gibbs?
I totally agree with you. As far as the award in itself, I mean, we could totally see a situation where, similar to with Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift, he gets some touchdowns stolen from him a little bit because he might be like the downfield running back because they're probably going to do this very similar scheme. which could prevent him from winning the award. But it doesn't change the fact that I think he may very well be the best running back in this class, including Bijan Robinson. And I could make a fair argument on that. And I think that's a real possibility. And I do think Bijan's really good. But Gibbs is, I mean, he's very, very similar to Alvin Kamara. I think that's the first thing I noticed when I watched him play at Alabama game 1 of the season of last season is he plays so similar to him when it comes to balance and the way he runs and his pace and how smooth he is, his catching ability. I think he's got the exact type of running back game that could transcend all the running back contract issues we've been talking about. Because really the exceptions are the people who get paid. Like look at Christian McCaffrey got paid. There's a reason. It's because he can do both. He can receive and he can run and he can do a lot of different things. Back to Bryce Young. I love that pick too. It's not my initial thought just because I mean, it's like probably the most likely one. I just wanted to go a little off the grid with Zay Flowers, but I think he's in the best position to do it. I mean, he's going to be the starter. He's got pretty good weapons around him. I saw Adam Thielen interview today and it was great. He was so positive. Had so many great things to say about him and the team in itself. I mean, the main thing that Damian was talking about was their culture and how good it feels to be a part of that team and how fun it was. And you could almost feel the energy. You know, when you watch those training camp videos, you can feel the vibe when you're listening to the background scene and stuff like that, even if it is just on TV. And it seems like they have a pretty good and look back at what they did last season running the ball. It's just a really good fallback for them. They're a really good, smart running team. They're a smash mouth, creative running team that knows how to succeed regardless of who the pieces are in there. So definitely some positives to come out of that. I'm excited about all these guys, and then there's lots of underground guys that we're not talking about. And I love the prospect of rookies in the NFL. It's super, super interesting to me because there's so many of them and there's so many opportunities to pop off that I think it's going to be great. I'm excited. And then one more I just want to give a little bit of love to that I think people are kind of forgetting about. I think that John Mechie, and of course, if John Mechie has a really good season, it means probably CJ Stroud has a pretty good season. And if they both have good seasons, CJ Stroud's going to win the award. And we probably need a separate episode for me to talk about how much I love CJ Stroud. And everyone that's close to me sports-wise knows how much I love him and how high I've been on him since 2 years ago. But I think John Mechie needs a little bit of love just because he went through a lot this past season, overcame cancer. And I saw him run like some pretty nasty routes in training camp, some replay videos. And I think it'd be really cool if he was a dude, an 800-plus yard dude, especially with the amount of opportunities that there is there with the Texans. Best receiver job on that team is there for the taking. And I think it would be really, really cool storyline if he was the one to do it.
Yeah, for sure.
So lots of excitement there.
All right. Do you want to get into defensive now? Who do you have for defensive rookie of the year?
Yeah, so we both have this pretty unanimous. If he would have been drafted last season, I would have said the same damn thing. Will Anderson is an absolute demigod. Yeah. You have 17 and a half sacks for Alabama as a sophomore. That alone, you're gonna be good. Like that stat alone, like very, 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 very high chance you are gonna pan out. One little weird caveat is he's switching from outside linebacker to defensive end, which who knows if that will have a little bit of impact, but based off of the stuff that's coming out of their camp, it's going to work. So I'm excited for him. I think he's going to run through people. He's an absolute monster. I think he's a walking Hall of Famer.
Yeah, I agree.
Honestly.
Just with pass rushing prospects like this, it's pretty – they normally dominate right out the gate. I mean, guys who are this generational at this position, Will Anderson is an absolute freak. Technique is there, power, speed, it's all there. And the Texans did something really interesting in this draft with getting their quarterback as well as the generational edge rusher and really kind of restarting their kind of rebuild, I guess. And I think this is the perfect situation for him. I think they are very much going to embrace him being their defensive, the kind of face of their defense. And I think that's going to work out really well for them, especially in his rookie year. I think he's going to absolutely pop off. He's going to explode. He's going to have 1 billion sacks, and he's going to even be good stopping the run as well. Who knows? Anything can happen, but I don't see a world at all where he's not great.
Yeah, I don't either. He's like the type of player if you have to bet your life on a dude to be good, like,
Yeah,
I'd
yeah,
probably choose him. I think it's a good time to be a Texans fan. I think there's a lot of stuff to be excited about. Especially, I feel like they deserve it too, having lost one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the league after all the Deshaun Watson stuff that happened.
yeah,
Loyal fan base too, who hasn't really tasted real winning yet. Few playoff wins here and there, but yeah, I think with Stroud, Anderson, everything they're doing is just, I think, fascinating. I think that's a cool team.
yeah.
Really, really cool team. So what about your dark horse? Do you have a dark horse
Yeah,
player that you're
so
kind of looking and zeroing in on?
I'm gonna be a little bit of a homer with this one, but
All right.
I'm gonna pick Joey Porter Jr. In terms of corners, he definitely I thought was a top 3 corner in this class. He ends up being taken with the first pick in the second round, behind I think 4 corners in the first round. Which is interesting. Obviously, this was a very strong DB class, but I think Joey Porter is in a good position to win Defensive Rookie of the Year because of the situation. I think he's going to play on a very good defense with obviously a very good pass rush, highlighted by T.J. Watt and Alex Highsmith. And I think he's going to be getting that rookie corner treatment. You know, Pat Pete is going to be playing alongside him, a veteran corner who's going to learn a ton from. And I think he's going to get thrown out a ton, just like all rookie corners do. And because of that, and because of how quickly this pass rush is going to get to quarterbacks, I think he could have just crazy interception numbers, and that is normally pretty helpful in this conversation, regardless of if he is the most technically sound corner in this class, which he might be, but he might not be as well. Like I said, this is a very strong DBs class, but that interception number is like a pretty strong narrative when it comes to awards like this, and I think he has a real good chance of maybe even like leading the league in picks, which happens a lot to young players who haven't broken out onto the scene yet because they get that treatment. Quarterbacks look their way all the time. They're not going to want to look at the proven guy. They're going to pick on the rookie. And I think Joey Porter has a real opportunity to make quarterbacks pay a lot in that range. And I think he's going to make a lot of highlight plays, obviously playing alongside another ball hawk with Minka Fitzpatrick and on just what I think is a top 5 defense. I think he has a dark horse shot at winning the award because of the numbers.
Yeah. So actually, my pick is a lot of the same rationale. A lot of the same rationale. Of course, a different team, but and historically, if you throw in, I mean, Steelers DBs have a really, really rich history, right? But team I'm talking about is similar, very, very rich history. Bill Belichick has a really, really, really deep history of producing good DBs, especially good corners, right? So I think Christian Gonzalez could be the dude this season. I feel like he could have 6+ picks for sure and be that star dude at that corner spot for them. And just that defense that's always going to produce and always going to be good as long as Bill Belichick is breathing. And
Yeah.
so, and he's fast, he's big, he's smooth, and he's smart. And yeah, Oregon guy too. So I'm excited to see what he does. And I definitely think that he will have a fighting chance at it too. Because I also think he's just going to start right away. And so that's going to help him too. Do you know, is Joey Porter going to start right away?
Yeah,
clearly, or is there going to be?
Well, they're giving him the shot to in camp right now, so I think he's going to win the position for sure.
Yeah. And then one more player that I think is actually kind of similar to Joey Porter and was kind of slated against him a little bit in the pre-draft process. And I got to see live against Oregon State and just watching a lot of Pac-12 games, and I think is not in the same position as these 2 players. I don't know if he's going to start for the Falcons, but Clark Phillips III from Utah, some of the damn plays he made in live games that I watched were so good, and just so his anticipation is another level, and he's pretty small. Of course, they have AJ Terrell, and then who's the other dude they have that they just signed? Jeff Okudah, right, from Detroit. Yep. So those are going to be the two guys holding it down for the Falcons. But I mean, if Okudah doesn't produce the way that he was supposed to from the start, I mean, or maybe an injury happens or something like that, he gets to slate in. I feel like he could get an opportunity and then never look back. If that makes sense, because I think he's got some star talent. But it definitely depends on situation with him, and I think opportunity. But I'm definitely going to be rooting for him. He's a cool player. So, and he was, I think, a 4th-round pick too. So it's like definitely the deepest player we have in this conversation so far. Yeah. So that's all I have defensive wise. You got any other players you want to throw out there? Or? pretty much finished?
I think we're pretty much finished. I mean, the Gonzalez thing makes a lot of sense. Like you said, it's a pretty similar kind of path to getting there as Joey Porter. The defense is going to be good. The pass rush is going to be really good. Very fundamentally sound defense, obviously, on the New England Patriots. And yeah, he was drafted. He had a pretty similar grade to Joey Porter in terms of like where he was projected. I am a big fan of Christian Gonzalez's game. So yeah, I definitely think he has a real chance of winning the award. Obviously, the award is mainly a edge rusher and cornerback award. So, I mean, safeties, D tackles, probably not. Just even if a Jalen Carter or someone is the best defensive player in this draft, the award is normally going to go to one of those two because those are the positions that people kind of pay attention to most on defense, for better or worse. So,
yeah. And I was just thinking this is a little bit off topic, but when you talking about your homebody Steelers, dude, we need to have like an episode or at least some type of segment at some point where we just talk about Mike Tomlin because he's so fucking awesome. Dude. He's like easily my favorite head coach in the NFL, maybe in all sports. I just listen to his interviews and some like the Tomlinisms that they call it. Like are so awesome. I'm definitely a lifetime fan of him. And even though I'm definitely not a Steelers fan and to some degree might even root against them in playoff situations, I would love to see him get more rings and solidify his legacy as one of the best coaches ever because he 100% is. Yeah. And so I hope the Steelers are good because of that standpoint. And that I wasn't aware of all that, the Tomlinism stuff until like in recent years. Just what didn't grow up a Steelers fan, but it's definitely something that I've caught on to and I just love to pay attention to. I think it's cool. So
held together a locker room with Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell, and Juju freaking Martavius Bryant.
And didn't hear a peep.
Yeah.
We didn't hear
for the longest,
peep. Yeah. Absolutely insane, dude.
Yeah.
He's the definition of culture. That's a master class in building a culture and a team.
Just managing people, dude. Like that's
dude. He's the best. So, so that's all we have for today's episode. A lot of good content here. Definitely, as Kyle said earlier on, this is the dead zone of sports.
Yeah.
So our excitement will shoot up as more stories come out and we get actual live games to comment on. Of course, we're 5 episodes in, and essentially the only thing we've reported on live or within recency is UFC, which I'm sorry, I didn't get to catch the most recent card. I was a little bit busy. Actually got engaged this past weekend. And so was too busy to watch that fight, but we'll definitely, as live content pops up, and we'll hopefully get into a little bit of baseball, but we're both very, very much so novices when it comes to baseball. So we're not as comfortable talking about that stuff. But things are going to get much more interesting. So definitely tune in and stick with us. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, closing thoughts for me, it's like Trent said, it's very much the dead zone, but that's all right. We are still super excited about NFL, and that's what we're going to be primarily focusing on. Baseball, I know that the trade deadline just happened, so that should be heating up. Maybe I'll kind of tune in a little bit more. Definitely could see myself doing that, especially once we get into more playoff time. NBA is going to be dead for a while. I mean, this is the off-season of the off-season for the NBA. But NFL preseason is starting in 2 weeks, I believe, for most teams. So that'll be fun. We can talk about that as training camp heats up. We get some actual action with these rookies to talk about, get us excited for. And then before you know it, the NFL season is going to be here, and we're going to be doing recaps every week. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to it. So, yeah.
Also, we have our fantasy draft this upcoming Sunday. So once that hits, then fantasy goes. We'll show you each our teams, show everybody each
Dynasty
of our teams.
Draft, which is
Dynasty
really
draft,
interesting.
Yeah, first time I've ever done. Have you ever done it, Kyle? I didn't know.
Not at all.
Yeah, so we're rookies on that. So that'll be fun. Lots of good content to talk about there. We could even do like a weekly recap for fantasy a little bit when we're going through the schedule and all the games when the season starts. So so don't forget to subscribe and like and comment any topics you'd like us to talk about in the future. Thank you so much for sticking with us. Can't wait to keep this thing going.